So here with Michele Fernandez, my name is Kyle Smith, and I just worked on this fantastic piece of hers called "Of Endless Miles and Empty Rafts," and put it together. Did a concert of it and loved it. And this piece is so special. Michele Fernandez, at 2024 a CBDNA Young Band Composition Contest winner. It's a grade 3.5 for afro-latin concert band piece. It's fantastic. We want to talk about it and kind of talk about how to put it together and things like that. So, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for actually thinking enough of the piece to program it with your own students.
Oh, my kids loved it.
I truly appreciate that. I really do.
Okay, so what's the message of the piece as a whole, and why did you write it?
Well, basically, the message of the piece is one of empathy. And I was very fortunate to be asked to write this for Braswell High School to premiere at Midwest. And the request was the director, Aaron Snipes, of Braswell High School. He sent me a lovely message asking me to write something of which I felt passionate. And he about what I felt passionate. And he said, just make sure that it embodies something cultural, something that is meaningful to you. And I immediately thought about just remembering when I was in middle school back in the 80s and the anguish that we felt as a community whenever a raft would wash ashore empty, because we knew that it was another family that had disappeared at sea. And that really never left me, that feeling. And there's actually a museum down the street from my mother's house that has some of those empty rafts. And I felt that it was a universal message. Just families trying to escape strife, trying to keep their children safe, trying to keep their families safe. And it doesn't matter what walk of life you're from, what era, what hemisphere. Everyone can think generations back and probably find someone in their family that had to leave their home to protect their loved ones. So that really was a driving force behind this. I have one letter in particular that came to mind from a student in Minnesota who played this piece, who said that she lives in a community it's where there aren't many immigrants, and there was a Cuban boy in her band who also went to her church. And she sent me this email out of the blue and told me that it was very meaningful to her, and that now she was more curious about his heritage and wanted to ask him questions about his family and how he got here. So that in itself, sparking curiosity about the kid sitting next to you is a beautiful thing, because it makes students see each other as, human beings whose families have a history. And let's foster curiosity about each other's history, and foster respect, foster empathy, foster appreciation for everyone's heritage differences. And it's just a beautiful thing, and I was inspired by that.
How do you structure the piece to portray that?
Structuring the piece, what came to mind when I was writing this was to do it in 3 stages. And it kind of happened organically, I guess. I immediately thought of myself on a raft, hanging on to family members, trying to keep them from falling out, battling waves in the dark, the beating rain. And that is what that corral, basically, the corral is, and whenever I do a clinic, I ask the kids to literally put themselves in that corral, into the staff, and basically think of themselves on the raft, trying to hang on to family members, the anguish, the intensity, and to achieve intensity through the articulation with the accents bouncing off the accents, to achieve intensity. The cymbal crashes, each one of those cymbal crashes literally symbolizes waves smashing against the side of the raft and splashing up into the air. And then at that very intense moment where it goes bum, 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 that's literally somebody falling over the side. Mm-hmm. And then you have that repeated section, bum, 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 and it just repeats and decays, and that's literally somebody sinking down into the depths, while the rest of the family is holding their hands out, crying out with the rain beating down. So that whole, it's very human, and not only has it happened many times, but it will continue to happen many times. whether it's a raft or whether it's somebody walking or somebody flying or whatever. And then after that, the second section goes into the wawanko. So it literally goes into a flashback immediately, which is where you hear that dum, 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 dum. And that wawanko it's a 3/2 wawanko rumba clave. And basically what it does is it takes the third note of the 3 side and delays it by half a beat. So da, ga, 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 da, 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 da.
One thing I want to mention as we talk about all these terms, the people who don't know yet, one of your mission is like to take people who don't know anything about Afro-Latin music and get them to be able to authentically play it. So, all the stuff you're talking about is very clearly notated in here, and people can just, if they can read music, then they can do this music authentically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I made it a point to write everything as concisely as I possibly could, with instructions for the actual players in the score and in their parts, so that they would be able to basically know exactly what they needed to do. And with the clave on the wawanko, I purposely wrote it on wood block. I've already heard some recordings where people substituted clave. Look, I'm Cuban. I know claves exist. If I didn't write it for clave, it was for a reason. So I definitely would encourage people to keep it on woodblock, so it has that nice, warm, comforting tone. Because the reason I wrote it on woodblock was to get a warm, dark tone instead of the usual high-pitched clave sound that kind of pierces the ear. And for this setting, I wanted it to be like a memory, a flashback, a comforting memory. So warm tones. And articulation-wise on this one, I purposely wrote it to basically portray a dignified life at home. So for example, not to put labels on who fell overboard, but whoever fell overboard, it's a flashback. That second movement is a flashback to their dignified, innocent life back home. A gentle soul living at home, not harming anyone, being kind, just living their life.
In their prime sort of thing, them prime. as they would have been.
Yeah, I almost pictured a grandmother picking flowers with the little grandkids running around the yard, or she's cooking dinner or whatever. And that's why the second movement, the guaguancó, is more gentle, it's orchestral, it's very dignified. And then when it goes into the section where it goes into the son montuno, it becomes more intense. Then that's where you switch to the 1, which is a 2/3 clave.
Can I read the program notes that you write for this section to describe it as you wrote? Still a flashback. Urgency sets in at home as turmoil intensifies into a pursuit, and the courageous decision to flee from danger comes to the forefront. The piece returns to the present remaining souls, and the intense finale depicts the will of the human spirit to survive and carry on, to thrive and contribute, now in their new home, to honor their loved ones, their lost loved ones' memories and courage.
That's basically what that, in that third movement. And honestly, each section in the third movement actually represents something happening as if it was a movie. For example, right when the son montuno begins, and you have that ominous low brass sustained note. Basically what's happening is it's still a flashback, it's still the past, but it's turmoil setting in. Something is happening, trouble is coming into the village or the town. And then when the horns begin, it's literally a conversation between family. Something's going on. Things are not well, this is dangerous, should we leave? It's a conversation happening. And basically when it starts to intensify, and when it goes into the low brass feature, bum, 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 da, da, dee, da, da, da. I've literally pictured that was the moment where the family, or whoever the head of the family, we need to get out of here, pack everything you can and let's go. So the whole family is running around the house, stuffing their belongings into a bag and getting out. And then after that, you've got the pursuit. da 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 ba ya ba da 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 da. It's literally pursue the person being chased, pursue the person being chased, the question and answers. It's a pursuit, and then they jump into the raft, and then you have that section that goes bum ba ba bum ba 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 da 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 bum ba ba, and right there, it's almost like time spinning, and you're right back into the present. So the family members who are still there are still battling the waves. They've already lost their one family member, but they're still battling the waves. And then when it gets to the very end, where it intensifies and the tempo accelerates, they just saw land, and they're hugging each other in relief, crying in relief that they saw land and they made it. And that's basically what's happening in the piece.
I love it. Yeah. So I think what, if you would still like to do this, our plan was sort of to talk about some general rehearsal notes, overall things that I know I dealt with as a teacher, working on this piece and recording this piece. And please, Michele, I think you know this, but if I say something that you disagree with, I know that you'll correct me.
I won't correct, because you know what? You did such a wonderful job. If it's anything, I will add a contrasting opinion.
Gracefully said. And then we're also going to go through and give a lot of specific things that I felt like were important and all that. So the first thing I'll say is my group is not a special group. I think we work really hard with the students we have, but the wind ensemble I played it with was, honestly, it was like 28 winds and 7 percussionists, and very limited instrumentation. And but I will say you really need 7 percussionists. The piano is optional. I actually cheated. I had our chorus teacher come and play the piano because I didn't have a kid and cover everything else. But other than that, my instrumentation was very limited. And I will mention our chorus teacher who played the piano part. I looked at the piano part and I'm like, oh, that's like not a big deal. She said it was actually trickier than it looked like. So when people are assigning the piano parts, the person has to know how to kind of adapt some fingerings and things like that.
Yeah, the piano part is definitely optional. It's only there to kind of reinforce some other things.
Yeah.
But it's tricky. If you've got a student who's been taking piano lessons for a while, they should be able to handle it okay. But
what I love about it is you have all the percussion elements in it, and when you add piano, it seems like a jazz band and concert band. We're in sort of that similar element, so that's why I chose to use it. The strongest percussionist. So this is the way I did it. My strongest percussionist was on congas, followed by my bongo player, followed by the tom player. So those three, and the toms, what the purpose was to reinforce the stuff that's happening on the authentic skins.
Absolutely.
And you wanted them placed on the side of the band so that they can be heard and not swallowed up in the back of the band.
Yeah, a lot of times we'll find skins in the back of the band, and really in these styles, contrary to popular belief, in these styles, it's not a drum set that drives this. It's the conga player and the bass line. Because in Afro-Cuban styles, the conga player and the bass player's rhythm, it's actually called the tumbao, Tumbao, and that is literally its slang for knocked out or laying down. And those are the two elements that lay down the groove. The clave is the fundamental pattern that locks it all together, like the glue in a model airplane. No one ever sees the glue, but if the glue wasn't there, all the pieces would fall apart. That's what the clave is. But the bass line, dun 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 dun, okay? Basically, in the son montuno especially, and this is super important, the bass drum part, click, boom, gong, click, boom, but the click should be soft. It's only there so that the bass drummer can find the downbeat. The beats that are important is the end of 2 and 4. 1, 2, go, go, 1, 2, go, go, 1, 2, go, go. And that's what the bass line has. The bassoons, bari sax, tuba. I also gave them a downbeat so that they could find the downbeat, but I wrote it staccato so that it's very light and almost indiscernible. So it should be da, 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 da. Because what matters is the da, da, the end of 2 and 4. So here's my advice, and I'm working my way backwards. For directors, let yourself dance on the third movement. Let yourself dance. I actually had a cute conversation with Julie Giroux, who conducted this for California when she did their All-State last month. And I said, girl, just let yourself dance on that podium, And if you even let your shoulder kind of go forward on the end of two, so dum, dum, bum, dum, dum. I've seen people try to conduct this in two. That doesn't work. Conducting this, first of all, I didn't write it in cut time. I wrote it in fast 4/4 for a reason. Because if you do it in cut time, the band drags. So conduct a short, crisp, small 4/4 pattern. Gong, 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 gong. And make sure that you let the kids know end of two. One, gong, 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 gong. One, gong, gong. That will lock the whole thing in like this. That's the pattern.
The last percussion part that I had that I was really, not that they're not all important, but when you have your sort of hierarchy of players, as even though it may not seem it to people, in my experience, the suspended cymbal woodblock marimba 2 person had, because in the last movement they have that clave pattern, that person needs to be really, really confident. So
yes, very confident, especially on the sections where it goes into the ride bell. King, 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 because there are two patterns that are very, very prevalent in son montuno style, which is also known as salsa. You've got the cáscara and the campaneo pattern. That's key, so that needs to be heard. So in the sections where the suspended cymbal player needs to go to the ride bell, make sure that ride bell pattern really cuts through, because those are key patterns. And the shaker, hold it up high and try to use the large egg shaker, not that little tiny one, because unless you're all the way in the front, no one's going to hear that.
well, you can have five. You can have 5 in each hand. You've done that before.
Yeah,
You
true.
have like 10 of them. That works.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's hard to control if you have that. If you've got the large egg shaker and you hold it up in the air, chances are the audience will hear it. Or if you've got the shaker that's got a lot of beads in it. Some shakers have very few beads in it and you can't hear it. But if you get like the high quality LP shaker that doubles as a guido, it's metal, it really cuts through. So chick, 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 chick. That's the cascada pattern that really needs to be heard. So it needs to cut through.
The next general thing I wrote down was, and this was mainly in movement too, carefully pay attention to the flute clarinet ensemble and how it trades and at times combines with the saxophone trio. And the way you wrote alto, alto, and tenor in 3 parts, and the way they kind of go back and forth, because at least in my band, it was very easy for the lower flute and the clarinet to kind of get swallowed up and the saxophone to kind of overplay that. So I had to kind of balance that. So the flutes had to play much louder and the saxophones were asked to play much softer. And I'm going to be honest, with this ensemble, by the time we played this, I only had 3 saxophone players. So a lot of times we go like alto, tenor, Barry, or alto, alto, Barry. But for this piece, we didn't use Barry at all because it doubled all the other bass instruments. We were able to use alto, alto, tenor because that tenor voice was basically an alto 3 with the way that you wrote it.
Right, and that's a good way to handle that. It's hard to anticipate a band's instrumentation. You try to predict, and then so what you try to do, excuse me, especially in writing like this, what you try to do is anticipate how anyone with any instrumentation can make this work. And if someone has very few flutes, then they need to make sure to tell everyone else, anything that says forte, take that with a grain of salt. Because what matters is everyone in the band needs to hear the flute. If they can't hear the flute, then they need to tone down their volume. Because there are a lot of melodic lines that are handed to the flute, and we need to hear that. And then because the third movement, especially the third movement, but also the second movement, like you just said, has some writing that is almost big band style and incorporated into a wind ensemble setting, it's important to be able to hear the woodwind balance. So make sure to bring the brass down and tell everyone, if you can't hear the flute, then take your forte and bring it down to mezzo forte. And that's very important.
And
one of the things, some people have 18 flutes and some people only have 3 flutes.
Well, and I assume you know this, but I always swear by what side you put the band. We put them on the band too. If it's a small flute section, put them on the conductor's left because the sound goes out to the audience. If it's a big section, or a bad section, put them on the conductor's right, and they kind of get swallowed up as well in the band.
And,
Just to mention what you just said about the listening for the flute, ensure the melody is always present and not covered up by the backgrounds. Like that's, I mean, that's a band director 101 thing, but so obviously it doesn't matter what's written on the paper to some extent. If you can't hear the melody, you got to bring the backgrounds down.
absolutely, absolutely. And again, when you've got so many different types of instrumentation, you never know which band is going to play. It could be a band that's got 12 flutes or 15 flutes, or a band that's got 5 flutes.
All right, so then we had listed kind of some specific spots of the piece that I had to deal with. You want to go through those? Is that something we want to include?
Yeah. So
Okay.
going back to the very, very beginning on the chorale, I would suggest making sure to have everyone hit those, every single accent with heavy air and then bouncing off. Because a lot of times kids will see an accent and they'll play the accent loud. And that's not what we want. What we want is intensity, which are two different things, because intensity and volume are not the same thing. You can be incredibly intense and never speak above a whisper. It's the way you say things. So at this very beginning, with great anguish during a perilous journey, dee da dee da da dee da da, dee da dee da dee da 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 dee da da. So really hit the note with heavy air and then back off.
Yeah.
And on the bell tones, hit them and back off. Otherwise, it's just loud and it doesn't have intensity. You can be amazingly intense and never go above a mezzo forte or even go above a piano. I would say definitely, the rolls. Those are literally waves rising up, and then cymbal crash are the waves smashing against the raft and splashing up. So really make a lot out of all the rolls that go from mezzo piano to double forte.
So people know the 3 sections of the piece. The first section is the smallest. The second section is the middle, and then I think that the San Juan Tuno is the longest. Maybe it's just because it takes up most of the score, but I think it's the longest part of it too. When I think of this piece, I think of the third section. So for me, in that second section, the woodwind melodies, we always talked about the accents being as interpreted as long. This is not in the first section, but in the second section, that they had to, because when my students play an accent, they also tend to shorten the note up a little bit.
Yeah,
And on this one, it was a longer sort of accent.
Yeah, on the second movement, because it's a flashback, a memory back home, and it says gracefully, delicately, ask your students to think orchestrally. Okay, it very, very gentle, subtle, graceful, dainty. Whenever I have done a live clinic of this piece, I tell the students, think of a butterfly gently resting on petals of a flower, and that delicate kind of touch. So even the accents, ti-da, ti, it's nothing more than a gentle lean in, almost as if, excuse me, almost as if you're trying to coax a puppy to eat their dinner and you're pushing them gently. Da, da, you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Just very gentle lean in. The accents are all long and they're nothing but lean in. The staccato's incredibly, incredibly light, like a drop of water bouncing off a leaf or a ping pong ball. You know, a ping pong ball is so light, you can't even tell if it's in your hands when you're trying to pick it up off the ground. So a ping pong ball bouncing off a timpani, that light. So the second movement, I
just wanted to say the word I used was classy. I sort of used like tuxedo, like very elegant. That's the word that we used.
That works. Elegant, graceful, delicately, gently, however you want to word it. The wawanko needs to be exquisitely gentle, delicate, classy. You got it. But then when you get to the third movement, that's where you've got, think of a Latin band at the Tropicana. It's very, forgive the word, but, jazz band-ish. And no, not forgive the word, because it's literally an Afro-Cuban Latin band setting right there. Do dit 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 da 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 da. So there you tell the kids staccato is now, it's not DIH anymore, di with lift. Now it's dit dit da, dit do dit da da da. And here's another important thing, the articulation. The staccato and the marcatos are both, should be in this piece, that third movement, tongue stopped, dit and dot. So think of a drop of water dripping from the faucet, drip, drip, drip. It's very light because there's a drop of water. But the marcato, or the rooftop, if you think of it as jazz, think of that big fat red target ball that's sitting on the sidewalk, dot, D-A-H-T. So you got dit, dit, dot. So that definition between the articulations will give it lots of punch and intensity without ever really having to get forte.
Yep. For me, thinking about the Son Montuno, I had to think kind of big picture and choose which sections should be the climax points within multiple phrases, so that it didn't stay at one dynamic level.
Right.
And I had some different choices that I made. I think I ended up on something, but just so the audience didn't see it as a continuous, without dynamic change. I wanted to point out measure 48 because it's an example of times when there's layers of music that are all happening at the same time. It's very dense, and finding a way to make them transparent and heard and separate, I'm going to be honest, was a challenge, especially in a really tough acoustical environment like my terrible sounding band room.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing, Son Montuno style, and again, Son Montuno, also known as salsa, but it's mostly a Son Montuno. It is very dense because you've got multiple rhythms happening. You've got the montuno happening, which normally is that rhythm that the piano player gon go gon 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 go. And in this case, you have that basically assigned to obviously the mallets, but you've also got it assigned to the upper woodwinds. Ga 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 go 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 go. That's the montuno. Then you've got the tumbao, which is with the bass line, and the congas. Gong, 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 gong. And you got you got all that going on. Then you've got cascara going on. Because here it is. Son Montuno is literally a jigsaw puzzle of multiple rhythms interlocking, and they have to be picture perfect so that you have clarity. Now, I like to tell the students, clarity. Make sure we can hear the letter D at the beginning of all your notes. Because otherwise, in the back of the auditorium, it sounds like pra, 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 instead of da, da, da. Make sure we hear the letter D. Make sure you know who has your same part. So I'll tell the flutes, okay, at 48, write OB/CL/ whoever else has their same part. That way they're all listening to each other. Then I'll tell the alto saxes, okay, write TS/ and whoever else has their same part.
Yeah.
TP/. That way, everyone has written in their part who else has their same part, and they can lock in together and try to achieve clarity by trying to play as uniformly as they can with everyone that has the same part. It doesn't take that long to do it, but if you take maybe 5 minutes at the beginning of the rehearsal to just have everybody pencil in abbreviations/ of everyone who has their same part at 48, you'll achieve clarity rather quickly because they'll lock in and they'll listen.
And a big step that I know works with my band and probably every other band too, start by playing softer. Kids tend to just play too loud. And if everybody just comes down, then you have the ability to be more transparent.
Yeah, always. That's a great point. And another tactic that you can use for the Son Montuno, especially the third section, is taking it slower with a metronome and having them play at double piano. That way they get used to just playing, locking in. There's something about loud that just makes everything wash out. So having them play softly with a metronome slowly until they lock everything in really, really well. And everybody needs to be aware of the and of 2 and beat 4 in the basses. So di, da, da, di, da, da, di, da, da. Try to coax the band to actually dance a little bit while they're playing. Di, da, da, di, da. If you just have everybody lean forward on every and of 2, the band will play a lot tighter right away. Right away. That's been my experience every single time, no matter what piece I'm doing.
Well, the minute you start making it a full body experience, it's going to be tighter. So
absolutely, and that's the point.
Yeah. I noticed here, so when we work on afro-latin music and jazz band, we talk about closures. Well, there's closures here as well. So for me, highlighting and teaching the use of closures to end some phrases. Some are just percussion closures, and some are shared with the band or very closely related. So a closure, would you define that for people if they don't know what I'm talking about?
Yes. In Spanish, cierre is a closure. And it's very customary in Afro-Latin forms. At the end of a phrase, you have everyone doing the same hit. Bat, bat, ga, 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 kum, da. Or something like that. For example, we have that in right before ba, 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 da. So we have measure 111. So an example of a cierre, or a closure, is where the whole band goes ba, da, ba, 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 ba. Everyone has the same thing. And that's the effectiveness of a closure. And basically it just means it's like in a jazz piece, a tutti punch, where everyone has the same thing. So sometimes you have those as percussion closures, and sometimes you have them with the full ensemble. Ba da ba 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 da ba ba da 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 da. And basically, if you can get those as tight as you can, then they end up being much more impactful.
Yeah, and I found when I work with my students, because if they're playing their own groove and they have to fit into something, they have to kind of think of themselves a little bit more while also listening. Whereas when they
Right.
know there's a closure, then it's like, okay, I need to make sure I'm with everybody else.
Right.
So speaking of the percussion solo at 104, a couple notes I made, because I had to work really hard to kind of get this to speak, I think, the way that you wanted at least. So I wrote in measure 104, getting the mallets and the piano to be present present enough to lead the percussion section. I had to use harder marimba mallets and have them play really aggressively, but be careful not to have it cut through the band on the rest of the piece, right? So marimba doesn't want to cut through the band, except for in this percussion solo, it really needs to lead. So I'm going to go against what you wrote and tell me if I'm incorrect. At 104, you have mezzo forte for the melody, but then forte, well, you have it down in marimba too. I treated all the skins basically a little bit softer so that we could hear the melody on top. And we live in a world in marimbas where we use speakers a lot of the times in marching band and things like that. So this obviously was not the case. I really had to have my melodic kids, overplay it out so that they can be heard.
Well, basically, if the main reason why it was written forte for the percussion is because if it's skins, and some people, even if the program notes said, or the rehearsal notes said, put the skins on the front, some people still put them in the back.
Yeah.
So then if they're in the back, they won't be heard.
Yeah.
Period. As well. So that's why, because they're skins, it's marked forte, and in a perfect world, the skins would be in the front on the edge, right behind the basses. Because that's the setup it really should have, because in reality, it's an Afro-Latin band. So the percussion should always be right behind the basses. And let's say the majority of folks might perhaps put their basses towards the right, let's say, on the edge. If that's, or on the left, whatever. The skins should be right behind the basses. Now, if the basses are in the center, then that's a different story. I would probably try to get the skins a little closer to the front, but still in close proximity to the basses, because in reality, the skins and the basses need to be close together. So in that setting, they need to be forte if somebody left them in the back. But again, it's not etched in stone.
Right.
It's not etched in stone. And if somebody switches to hard mallets, then it's not an issue at all. They can go ahead and switch to hard mallets and they'll be heard.
As long as they get off of them so they're not too loud the rest of the time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I did want to mention too, because that marimba part moves fast enough, it's a little harder for them to dig in if they're not like super experienced players.
Right, right.
And then I also wrote for the finale, for me, I have the final climax so this is also for everybody listening. It's hard to tell people about their own piece and hope that you're right. For me, the final climax I have at 147. And this gives the piece direction and helps the structure make sense to the audience. To me, it was easy to get too loud too quickly. For me, like especially 139, and then even 131 at one point, we were too loud. And maybe if I had a really large band, I could then kick it into another gear, but we didn't have that. So I had to be really careful to not get our full volume until the last, 8 measures, and that kind of gave it direction for us.
Right. Absolutely. And again, this also goes into, you try to write a piece not being able to anticipate what someone's instrumentation would be. So at 139, writing a double forte with fire is really if someone has a medium-sized to smaller ensemble, because it needs to be intense. And then when you get to 147, even if you can't get louder because were already playing your double forte, the fact that you're playing it faster and with a furious state of mind, then it will achieve the intensity that we're going for. Now, if you've got a larger ensemble, then you can definitely play with the dynamics a bit more, and you've got more flexibility. But yeah, definitely 147 should be more intense, furiously, but let the tempo actually carry that. It can actually be the same volume as it was at 139. But there's something about increasing tempo and the way that the harmonies are written there and the percussion that it already lends to more intensity because of some of the unison percussion hits that we've got going at 147.
Michele, this has been an awesome time. Thanks for kind of walking us through the piece, and I'm happy to have lent some of my short expertise on my time with it as well. And I was very happy that you sort of approved, if you will, of the rendition that we were able to do.
I more than approved. I remember that, and I would love for you to share it, if you don't mind, at the end of the broadcast, because when I heard it, I heard so much meticulous preparation as to the interpretation and the style. And Kyle, I have to say, I really appreciate that, because you actually, I mean, as I was listening to it, I could actually picture you talking to the kids about what's happening at this point in the piece, visually, image-wise. I could hear you talking to them about articulation. I could hear you talking to them about rhythmic structure and precision and clarity. And it all came together, and it was so not only meticulously done, but thoughtfully done from a cultural perspective. And that's why I actually wanted to do this, because I really wanted to have you share your thought process as you went through this, as you were putting it together. Because I've done plenty of clinics on this particular piece, and just to have this resource, if I'm not available to do the clinic, I hope it's helpful to other directors, but even more helpful is to have them hear some recordings of some of the high schools doing this, especially, Braswell's and yours, because, you both were so meticulous about this. And your band program didn't have a specialized mission of going to Midwest. It was a regular program that everybody else has, and you still pulled it off really beautiful and meticulously.
And to be fair, we had some mold in our auditorium. So we were in our own high school auditorium, which is like one of these really tiny theater programs. So the kids were like on top of each other playing it. So I'm just thinking about that, and the fact that they were able to convey that to you as a listener in that setting made me happy. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it made me happy to hear your rendition. So thank you so much.
All right, so we'll put the recording on here, and we can end with that. Michele, thanks so much. Glad we could do this.
Thank you so much, and I just want to thank anyone who's interested in playing the piece. And my main interest in this is to convey the message to the kids in your band room, to look at the person next to you and wonder what their heritage is and where their great-grandparents came from, and ask questions and appreciate each other's past and each other's struggles. And that's really what this is about.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.